Jeremy Griffith, I just watched the interview that you posted online, and I wanted to send a response video to say thanks for your contributions to these discussions, and to interact with them a little bit if you're interested in having me do so. I've been exploring very similar avenues of thought over the last 20 years or so since I began my graduate studies in linguistics and semantics. And through studying that and ancient Near Eastern studies as well, Old Testament, Hebrew, ancient Near East, those two disciplines kind of help me in my other, para-academic or extracurricular interests of always being a lifelong student of the natural world and the ecosystems that exist here. And then, of course, by extension, the cosmos. So, I just wanted to say, thank you. It seems like there is like a collective consciousness kind of coming together right now around the world with like-minded people like yourself and like me and many others in the, toward the edge of the scientific community, unfortunately. But I agree, and I think we all agree that there is answers out there to our most core dysfunctions and needs, and that those answers can be derived from clear-minded reason based on science and what we learn from science as the default reality. So anyway, I agree, and when we hear the answer, it will be clear to us and obvious. The answer, whatever it might be, would have that sort of nature. So to interact a little bit, I don't even know sort of where to start necessarily. There are a number of things that stood out to me from what you shared. I was interested in your naturalistic explanation of how ethics and morality would have crossed the barrier between, from instinct to an ethical imperative around us through child rearing, through extended child rearing. The mother would be evolutionarily selfish in her actions, but communicates and nurtures empathy in their children. It's a good explanation. It's a good theory, and I like it. And it made me think about, other animal species that are known for their empathy and defense of others, like elephants defending wildebeests against lions, dolphins and whales defending humans and others from predators. Even octopus seem to have that sort of thing. It strikes me from an anthropological sense that there might be other things at work in addition to this biological to as you put it, intelligence learning and nerve-based learning, as opposed to I forget what you put it, chemical-based learning, maybe instinctual learning. Baboons, for instance, there's some instances of violent troop leaders in a baboon society who gets succeeded by a male leader of the troop who is far more kind and gentle, and when that happened, the whole culture of the whole troop changed to one of more gentleness and less violence. And then apparently the leader that succeeded the kind leader followed suit, and that particular troop diverged from other baboon troops to be more peaceful. Whether that's linear, I think you say that humans have had this altruistic ethic for 2 million years. Maybe that's true. I don't know. Take chimpanzees on the north side of the Congo, and they have similarly long child rearing processes, but far more violent, aggressive, and seemingly angry cultures amongst them. Maybe they're further advanced toward our trajectory than bonobos or bonobos, and used to be like bonobos in their peacefulness, or maybe more peacefulness is in the chimpanzee's future, or maybe bonobos have a number of undulations like that ahead of them. So I don't know if it's linear development or evolutionary development necessarily. I think you are saying that this was a necessary path that we took, though it be difficult. And I don't know necessarily whether it is the path we took, so it's irrelevant, I guess. But anyway, human morality is something that really does interest me. And like I said, I came up through one portion of my graduate studies is in seminary, learning about the ancient Near Eastern cultures and the early writings. So, the way that I have looking at Genesis 1 and 2 in particular has helped me piece together an anthropogeny that can account for evolutionary history and biological accountings for the human development, the human cognitive development, the human condition. And so this is kind of how it would go. Dr. John Walton actually is one of the pioneer scholars on oral tradition. And he points out that these early accountings, the ontologies or the creation stories that we find in the Bible and in other comparable texts from similar dating, are the accounting of the creation in a metaphorical sense, or in a symbolic sense rather, that this was the accounting of when creation dawned on humankind. That if we look at the poetic structures of the initial chapter in Genesis, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. He created light and darkness. He created water and land. He created the fish that swim in the sea, the animals that crawl on the ground and fly in the air. These are all very categorical and functional in nature. So in other words, it mirrors what you say, that when humans expanded in their consciousness, they learned a deeper level of cause and effect. And essentially that corroborates what Dr. Walton has found with these early oral traditions. You say Moses wrote it down about 1000 BC. Maybe that's about when he did that. But he's writing down stories that have been passed down through however many generations. It could be thousands of years that these stories had been passed down all the way until Moses. And he happened to be the one to actually record them as they were when they reached Moses' ear. And that seems to be about the time that these stories were being written down. But the stories themselves and the discipline of passing down oral traditions by generations prior to Moses is very compelling, to say the least. So these could be stories from when our consciousness expanded. And so what John Walton points out, and many other scholars corroborate, is that these stories, these proto-oral traditions, are the first teleologies. So they're not physical ontologies of matter being created and the the cosmos popping into existence. Rather, it's the teleology of when humans began to understand those things at a deeper level and in a way that we can place ourselves in those contexts in a differentiated way. In other words, existential awareness. So you are using terminology, I think, to say that we have reached, how did you put it? We've reached full consciousness, I believe you say. We're fully aware, full consciousness. And I think, for me, consciousness is much more on a continuum and reaching back into the animal kingdom. And intelligence is another thing that we see, whether that's cognitive intelligence or understood intelligence or automatic or instinctual intelligence, can be debated all day. But I think that we see a continuum in the evolutionary process. I think you agree with that. But I don't necessarily agree that we have reached full intelligence or awareness. That we're still very much evolving in that way and probably will forever. But I think the key aspect of consciousness that in this discussion is the discussion about existential awareness. So, first chapter of Genesis, everything dawns on mankind. We learn about each thing's function and how that we exist next to the plants and animals, dependent on the plants and animals, interdependent with plants and animals, and ultimately, as we grow in our knowledge of our own power, responsible for all the other plants and animals. And so that's the end of chapter 1 there. God made us in his image and set us to rule over everything that existed. So prior to eating the fruit of knowledge, I'll get there in a second, but prior to that is when our consciousness expanded into a more teleological understanding of the systems in which we find ourselves. Stewardship of mankind is echoed in other contemporary ontologies, and many of us think that was part of our pre-fallen consciousness or existence, that before, as you put it, egocentrism, anger, and competitiveness grew in us, we did understand ourselves in context and did understand that our job in the ecosystem is, at least in part, to steward ourselves in relationship to everything else, lest we destroy it. Okay, so Genesis 1 is the ontology of meaning, basically, the connection of all things. For us, our consciousness expanded. We understood ourselves and our stewardship mandate. And then chapter 2 comes, which is the Garden of Eden. And there's a recapitulation of, God created all the animals and everything like that. These are representations of what we have learned. So we learned about the animals in a new way, and we found ourselves in a garden full of trees that had not literal fruit, but the fruit of knowledge, of all kinds of knowledges. So Adam and Eve didn't actually eat of the tree of knowledge, they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the knowledge of the good and evil is it just represents a human odyssey, basically. And the other tree mentioned is the tree of life. And again, that would be the tree, or the human pursuit or odyssey into learning about, life. I actually kind of think that these two trees mentioned could represent a legal code, which was popular at that time, or in ancient Near East, early ancient Near East, is developing a legal code, versus the tree of life representing science. That they're basically choosing between, do we take morality, good and evil, into our own hands and begin to conventionalize a legal system around that, so that we're the ones wielding that power basically for ourselves. We don't want to defer to the universe anymore to do justice. If somebody steals from me, I want to exact my own justice and know that this person had to pay. Or do we pursue diving deeper into what we had just learned about the cosmos and about the ecosystems, science? And in the story, God warns Adam and Eve not to eat of, they can eat of any other tree in the whole garden. God encourages that in that chapter. And the only warning he gives is don't eat of the knowledge of good and evil. In other words, it'll go badly for you if you do that. This is not, given your stage in your development of existential awareness, eating of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, or in other words, taking upon yourself the responsibility over good and evil, is not a good idea. It will wreak havoc upon you. It'll fuck you up. It'll destroy you from the inside out, because all that will happen is that you'll gain all kinds of worries. And the core anxieties, that I've found through my reading are guilt, shame, and fear. And anthropologists have pointed out that around the world, indigenous cultures are inevitably defined, or not defined, but have a preeminent stream of one of these three: guilt, shame, and fear. All three exists in every culture, but each culture has a highlighted one. I actually think guilt and shame are different forms of fear, and that fear is the most overarching category for human disruption. I think any anxiety is just another form of fear. Fear and anxiety are the same thing. And anxiety is the thing that drives every divergent human expression that makes us miserable. So we agree on that one too. Anxiety is the root. I would say that egocentrism, anger, and competitiveness are probably more secondary or tertiary symptoms of guilt, shame, and fear. And guilt, shame, and fear are the symptoms or the results of our underdeveloped existential awareness, but understanding of our own inevitable mortality. Because we know we're going to die, and because we don't fully understand who and what we are, we're underdeveloped in our existential awareness. We're doomed to a life of anxieties, of all kinds of anxieties, and those become generational traumas passed down to our children and so on. So yeah, a lot more that you said that interested me, and I'd love to interact more, but thought you might be interested in kind of what I've been working out for the last 20 years or so. Been writing about it in my blog and just trying to figure it all out. So anyway, thanks so much, and we'll talk to you later.